I am Chloe Whitman, and I once believed betrayal was a visible thing, a furtive glance, a whisper behind a closed door, something you could catch in the act. But no, it arrived cloaked in my sister Elise's smile, sharp and gleaming as my husband, Sebastian, pushed me down the stairs to test if I was truly pregnant. The silence that followed the fall, the averted eyes of those around me, and Elise's cold, cutting laugh, those were the blades that pierced deepest. This story isn't just about the fall. It's about how I rose, clutching evidence in trembling hands and a fire in my chest I never knew I possessed. It began on a quiet morning in our Georgian townhouse in Bath, England, where the pale light filtered through heavy damask curtains. I sat on the edge of the clawfoot tub, my breath shallow, staring at the pregnancy test in my hand. Two faint lines, fragile as a whispered promise, stared back. After 3 years of trying, after the surgery that left scars both physical and unseen, after Sebastian's resigned words, "Perhaps we're not meant to be parents," I was pregnant. My heart thudded, not with joy but with a cautious hope, brittle as the frost on our window panes. I didn't shout or cry. I tucked the test away, deciding to wait for the doctor's confirmation to shield this delicate truth from the world, especially from Sebastian's growing indifference. He came home early that evening, his footsteps heavy on the oak floorboards. Gone was the warmth that once lit his hazel eyes, replaced by a distracted coolness. He tossed his keys into the porcelain dish by the door, asked about dinner with a voice flat as the slate tiles in our kitchen. We ate leftover lamb stew in silence, the clink of spoons against bowls the only sound. "Are you all right?" I ventured, my voice softer than I meant. He glanced up, then down again. "Fine. Just tired." No kiss, no hand grazing my back as he once did. He vanished upstairs before I finished eating, leaving me alone with the ticking of the grandfather clock and a gnawing unease. The next morning, I cleaned to quiet my restless mind, folding linens and sorting papers in our study overlooking the Crescent Park. Reaching into my leather satchel for a grocery list, my fingers brushed something foreign, smooth, cold, metallic. A tiny black recorder, no bigger than a matchbox. My pulse quickened, my throat tightening as I stared at it, its presence an accusation. Had Sebastian placed it there? When had I left my bag unattended? My mind spiraled, paranoia or instinct. I couldn't recall him mentioning work gadgets, yet here it was, hidden in my personal things. I slipped it back into the bag, my hands trembling not with fear but with a dawning realization. I was being watched. That Friday, Sebastian's demeanor shifted. He wasn't affectionate but observant, too observant. At breakfast, as I sipped tea in our sunlit kitchen, he asked, "Don't you have that OB appointment coming up?" His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp, like a hawk tracking prey. "How did you know?" I asked too quickly. "It's on the fridge calendar," he said, pouring coffee. But I never put medical appointments there. Later, when I chose decaf, he raised an eyebrow. "Cutting back on caffeine?" I forced a laugh. "Just trying to sleep better." He nodded, but his gaze lingered as if testing a hypothesis. That night, lying beside him in our four-poster bed, I stared at the coffered ceiling, my thoughts tangled. The man I married was slipping away, replaced by a stranger whose motives I could no longer read. We'd love to know where you're from. Leave a comment below and share your country with us. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. The morning was still, the kind of quiet that settles over Bath, England when the world feels paused. Our Georgian townhouse, with its honey-colored stone and ivy creeping up the facade, seemed to hold its breath alongside me. I sat on the edge of the clawfoot tub in our bathroom, the porcelain cool against my thighs, clutching a pregnancy test. Two faint lines stared back, delicate as the first snowflakes of winter. After 3 years of trying, after an agonizing surgery that left me hollow, after Sebastian's resigned words, Perhaps we're not destined to be parents. I was pregnant. My heart didn't leap with joy. It trembled with a fragile hope, one I wasn't ready to share. Sebastian's warmth had faded over the years, replaced by a coldness that crept into his eyes like frost on a windowpane. I feared his reaction, indifference, or worse, disbelief. So I tucked the test into a velvet pouch and hid it in my dresser, vowing to wait for the doctor's confirmation to cradle this secret a little longer. That evening, Sebastian returned early, his boots echoing on the oak floorboards. The man who once greeted me with a kiss and a playful tug at my scarf was gone. He tossed his keys into the porcelain dish by the door, the clatter sharp in the silence, and asked about dinner in a monotone that felt rehearsed. I served leftover chili, the steam curling in the air between us as we ate at the mahogany dining table. The chandelier above cast soft shadows, but there was no warmth in the room. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, hoping to reach the man I once knew. He glanced up from his bowl, then down again. "Fine. Just tired." No touch, no lingering glance. He stood before I finished, disappearing upstairs, leaving me with the ticking of the grandfather clock and a knot of unease tightening in my chest. The next morning, I cleaned to quiet my racing thoughts, folding linens and sorting papers in the study overlooking the Crescent Park, where morning mist clung to the grass. Reaching into my leather satchel for a grocery list, my fingers brushed something unfamiliar, smooth, cold, metallic. A small black recorder, no larger than a matchbox, nestled in the lining. My breath caught, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't mine. Had Sebastian placed it there? When had I left my bag unattended? My mind raced back to the previous week, when I'd left it on the hall table during a delivery. Paranoia clawed at me, but I couldn't shake the instinct that I was being watched. I slipped the device back into the bag, my hands trembling not with fear but with a dawning anger. I wasn't ready to confront him, not yet, but a wave of suspicion began to swell, lapping at the edges of my trust. By Friday, Sebastian's behavior shifted. He wasn't affectionate, but he watched me with an intensity that felt clinical, like a scientist studying a specimen. At breakfast, as I sipped chamomile tea in our sunlit kitchen, the scent of fresh scones lingering, he asked, "You've got that OB appointment coming up, haven't you?" His voice was casual, but his hazel eyes were sharp, searching. I froze, the teacup halfway to my lips. "How did you know?" I asked too quickly. "It's on the fridge calendar," he replied, pouring coffee from the French press. But I never recorded medical appointments there, a habit from years of guarding my privacy after our first loss. My stomach twisted, but I forced a smile. Later, when I chose decaf at lunch, he raised an eyebrow, his lips curling slightly. "Giving up proper coffee now?" I laughed, a brittle sound, and mumbled about wanting to sleep better. But his gaze lingered as if he were testing a theory, probing for cracks in my facade. That night, lying beside him in our four-poster bed, the heavy brocade curtains drawn against the world, I stared at the coffered ceiling, my thoughts a tangle of dread and memory. I remembered our first pregnancy, the one that ended in a quiet hospital room 2 years ago. Sebastian had held me briefly, his embrace mechanical, before saying, "Don't tell anyone." "It's embarrassing enough." His words had stung then, but I'd buried the pain, convincing myself he was grieving too. Now, pregnant again, I felt the weight of his detachment like a stone in my chest. The man beside me, his breathing steady and distant, was no longer the Sebastian I'd married. He was a stranger, and the realization settled over me like a fog rolling in from the River Avon. Saturday brought a call from my younger sister, Elise, her voice bright and syrupy through the phone. "Chloe, darling, you must come to the family dinner next Friday at Sebastian's parents' estate," she chirped, as if we were still the close-knit sisters of our childhood. "Everyone's asking about you, Sebastian, too." Her laugh was light, but it carried an edge like a blade wrapped in silk. I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the phone. I wanted to stay home, to curl up in the conservatory with a book and protect the secret growing inside me. But Elise's insistence, laced with that familiar teasing tone, left little room for refusal. "You're probably in your pajamas now, aren't you?" she teased. I forced a chuckle, but it felt hollow. As we hung up, I sat on the velvet settee, staring out at the cobblestone street where horse-drawn carriages sometimes passed, a relic of Bath's history. My hand drifted to my stomach, a silent promise to the life within. "This time," I whispered, "I'll keep you safe." But safety felt fragile. That night, after Sebastian claimed a headache and retreated to his study, I found myself in the library, surrounded by leather-bound books and the faint scent of aged paper. I pulled out an old journal, one I hadn't touched since the miscarriage. Flipping through its pages, I found an entry from that dark time, my handwriting shaky. Maybe Sebastian's right. Maybe it's better we didn't tell anyone. The words stung anew, but what caught my breath was a faint smudge on the page, as if someone else's thumb had pressed too hard. Elise had visited that week, dropping off a scarf she'd borrowed. Had she read this? The thought sent a shiver through me, not of fear but of betrayal's quiet confirmation. Closed the journal, my resolve hardening. Whatever game Sebastian and Elise were playing, I would not be their pawn. Elise's call came on a crisp Saturday morning, her voice dripping with honey as it crackled through the phone in our Bath townhouse. "Chloe, darling, you must come to the family dinner next Friday at Sebastian's parents' estate in the Cotswolds," she said, her tone bright but edged with that familiar teasing lilt. "Everyone's asking about you, Sebastian, too." Her laugh, light as a summer breeze but sharp as a thorn, sent a prickle down my spine. I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the receiver, the weight of the pregnancy test hidden in my dresser pressing against my thoughts. All I wanted was to stay home, curled up in the conservatory with a woolen blanket, shielding the fragile life inside me. But Elise's insistence, paired with her playful jab, "You're probably in your pajamas now, aren't you?" left little room for refusal. I mumbled my agreement, the words tasting like defeat, and hung up, staring out at the cobblestone street where morning mist clung to the lampposts. My hand drifted to my stomach, a silent vow, "I'll protect you." The week crawled by, each day heavy with Sebastian's detached presence. When Friday arrived, I chose a long cashmere cardigan to conceal the subtle changes in my body, the faint curve I'd begun to notice in the mirror. Sebastian drove us to his parents' sprawling Cotswolds manor, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles blanched. The silence in the car was oppressive, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional patter of rain on the windshield. I stared out at the rolling hills, their green softened by dusk, and felt the weight of his unspoken thoughts pressing against me. The manor glowed with golden light, its stone facade softened by climbing roses. Soft jazz floated from hidden speakers in the garden, where fairy lights twinkled among the hedgerows. Relatives in tailored blazers and silk dresses mingled around a table laden with cheese and wine, their laughter as polished as the crystal glasses. I felt like an intruder in this scene of curated warmth. Elise arrived fashionably late, her white jumpsuit catching the light like a beacon. She swept toward me, enveloping me in a hug that lingered too long, her perfume cloying. "Chloe, you're positively glowing," she whispered, her breath hot against my ear. "Something in your belly, perhaps?" Before I could respond, she pressed a pink gift bag into my hands, the words for future little surprises glittering on it. Her giggle was sharp, performative, drawing eyes from nearby cousins. My chest tightened, a cold dread pooling inside me. I stayed near the drinks table, clutching a glass of sparkling water, pretending it was champagne. When I declined a third glass of Merlot, Sebastian's mother, Eleanor, tilted her head, her pearl earrings catching the light. "No wine tonight, Chloe?" "That's not like you." Before I could answer, Sebastian interjected, his voice light but his eyes cold as slate. "She's been eating oddly lately." "Cravings, probably nothing." The word nothing landed like a stone, and I felt the weight of curious glances, the silent calculations beginning. Then it happened. As I bent to retrieve my satchel, which had slipped to the dew-damp grass, the pregnancy test, the one I'd kept hidden in a zippered pocket, tumbled out, glinting under the fairy lights. Elise's voice cut through the air, theatrical and piercing. "Oh my God, Chloe, carrying that around like a trophy?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Sebastian stepped forward, picking up the test with a deliberateness that chilled me. "She's had it for weeks," he said, his voice icy, his eyes locked on mine. "Don't read too much into it." The words weren't for the guests, they were for me, a warning dressed as dismissal. I fled to the manor's powder room, locking the door behind me. The mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized, pale, eyes wide with a mix of shame and fury. Test, my sacred secret, had been turned into a jest, my hope mocked before a crowd. I pressed my hands to the marble sink, my breathing ragged, trying to anchor myself against the rising tide of humiliation. I hadn't told anyone because I wasn't ready to grieve publicly again, not after the first loss when Sebastian dismissed my pain as an embarrassment. Now they'd stolen my moment, touched it with careless hands. When I emerged, Elise leaned against the hallway wall, her arms crossed, a half-smile curling her lips. "Was that your big reveal, Chloe?" she asked, her tone mocking, her eyes glinting with something cruel. I didn't answer, didn't flinch, but inside something shifted, a cold, sharp resolve taking root like frost creeping across a window. I walked past her, my steps steady on the polished oak floor, but my heart pounded with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just a moment of betrayal, it was the beginning of a pattern I was starting to see. Back in the garden, the party continued, but I felt detached, as if watching through a fogged lens. Relatives asked about my work, our plans for a Lake District holiday, but their words felt hollow, their smiles too practiced. I sipped my water, my mind racing. Elise's gift bag sat at my feet, its pink tissue paper a garish reminder of her cruelty. Sebastian moved among the guests with ease, playing the charming host, but I caught him glancing at me, his expression unreadable yet heavy with intent. As the night wore on, the manor's warmth felt suffocating, the jazz a mocking backdrop to my unraveling world. I excused myself early, claiming a headache, and Sebastian drove us home in silence, the countryside blurring past like a forgotten dream. That night, alone in our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed, the pregnancy test in my hands. The two lines were darker now, undeniable, but the joy I'd hoped for was buried under dread. I thought of Elise's laugh, Sebastian's cold dismissal, and the recorder in my bag. Something was wrong, deeply, deliberately wrong. I placed a hand over my stomach, whispering to the life within, "They won't break us." But as I lay down, the weight of their betrayal settled over me, heavy as the bath stone walls around me. I wasn't just protecting a pregnancy anymore. I was guarding my truth, and I would fight for it. The morning after the party, I woke to an empty bed, the sheets on Sebastian's side cold and untouched. The Bath townhouse was silent, save for the distant coo of pigeons outside. My body ached, not just from the pregnancy but from the weight of last night's humiliation, my sister Elise's theatrical gasp, the pregnancy test exposed like a dirty secret, Sebastian's cold dismissal. I couldn't shake the image of Elise's smirk, her eyes gleaming with malice. Determined to find answers, I turned to the home security system Sebastian always claimed was for our protection. In our study, where morning light spilled through leaded windows onto rows of leather-bound books, I called the security company. With the help of a polite technician, I accessed the footage from the party, my hands trembling as I navigated the archive on my laptop. The screen flickered to life. There I was, standing stiffly in the corner of the Cotswolds manor garden, clutching my sparkling water. Elise swept in, her white jumpsuit glowing under the fairy lights, all performative charm. Then, at 7:03 p.m., my satchel fell, the pregnancy test tumbling out. But from that moment until 9:04 p.m., the footage was gone, a 2-hour void of static. No error message, no power outage, nothing. My heart pounded, not with shock but with a grim certainty. This wasn't a glitch, it was deliberate. Someone had erased the truth. When Sebastian returned that afternoon, his hair damp from a supposed gym session, I confronted him in the kitchen, the scent of rosemary from last night's dinner lingering faintly. "Why is there a 2-hour gap in the footage?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside. He gave a tight laugh, wiping his hands on a tea towel. "Old system. Probably a glitch." His eyes didn't meet mine, and I knew he was lying. Back in the study, I exported the corrupted file to a USB, encrypted it with a password only I knew, and deleted the original from the system. "If they think I'm bluffing," I whispered to the empty room, "they'll regret it." The words felt like a vow, not just to the child I carried, but to the woman I was becoming. The next evening, we returned to his parents' manor for another family gathering, the air thick with unspoken tension. Sebastian pulled me aside as we entered, his hand firm on my arm. "We need to talk," he said, leading me to the grand staircase, its mahogany banister gleaming under the chandelier. Halfway up, he stopped, his face shadowed. "Are you still pretending to be pregnant, Chloe?" His voice was low, venomous. "This isn't new. You've worried everyone before with your exaggerations." My breath caught, indignation rising, but before I could respond, he placed a hand on my shoulder and pushed, not hard but deliberate. I stumbled, my foot catching the carpet's edge. Pain shot through my spine as I fell 3 steps, my elbow slamming into the wood, my hip bruising against the floor. From the hallway above, Elise's laugh floated down, light as a melody but sharp as a blade. No one rushed to help. The silence of the house, with its tapestries and antique clocks, felt complicit. Sebastian drove me to the hospital, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel, the silence between us heavier than the rain outside. In the sterile fluorescent light of the emergency room, a doctor confirmed what I dreaded. The pregnancy was gone. A nurse, her gray hair tucked under a cap, checked my chart and paused. "You didn't just fall, did you?" she asked softly, her eyes kind but piercing. I couldn't speak, but her nod told me she understood. Alone in the recovery room, I stared at the ceiling, the ache in my body nothing compared to the betrayal searing my heart. My phone buzzed, a single smiley face emoji from Elise. The sight of it turned my grief to resolve, a cold, unyielding determination. Back home, I began to piece together their scheme. In the study, I found a receipt buried in a drawer, a purchase from a medical novelty site for a fake ultrasound kit, something Sebastian had once laughed off as a Halloween prank. Then, in my journal, I discovered smudged pages from the week of my first miscarriage, words I'd written in anguish now tainted by Elise's prying fingers. She'd been in my study months ago, claiming to drop off a scarf, but she'd clearly rifled through my pain, weaponizing it. I found a recording on my phone from a doctor's visit Sebastian insisted on attending, his voice calm and calculated. "How can you verify a pregnancy is real? Some women exaggerate, for attention." Each discovery was a brick in the wall of their betrayal. I poured my rage into an anonymous op-ed, gaslit by blood, posted on a women's rights forum. I detailed the recorder, the erased footage, the receipt, and their coordinated cruelty, careful not to name them but unmistakable in context. Posts spread like wildfire, thousands sharing it, their comments a chorus of outrage and empathy. Elise, panicked, posted a tearful video on social media, claiming family messiness and begging for forgiveness. Backfired spectacularly, the internet tearing her apart for her crocodile tears. Then Ivy, my quiet neighbor who'd been at the party, came forward. Standing in my living room, gripping her purse like a lifeline, she whispered, "I saw Sebastian push you, Chloe. He waited until your back was turned. It wasn't an accident." Her words were a lifeline, grounding my truth. With my lawyer's help, I filed for divorce and prepared for a final confrontation. At another family dinner, I played the recording of Sebastian's chilling words. "If she keeps lying, maybe a fall will make her tell the truth." The room froze, Elise's fork clattering to her plate, his mother's wineglass trembling in her hand. They had no defense. Days later, a letter arrived from Jasper, Elise's ex-boyfriend, slipped under my door in an unmarked envelope. He revealed Elise's long-standing jealousy, how she'd planned to discredit me out of envy for my life. Included was a grainy audio file from years ago, Elise's voice unmistakable. I'll make sure Chloe's little fairy tale falls apart. Starting with that test. The letter, paired with an invitation from the North Carolina Women's Advocacy Collective to speak at a survivors retreat, pushed me forward. I stood before a room of women in a pine-shaded hall, my voice steady despite the weight of their gazes. "I'm not here to teach you how to heal," I said. "I'm here to tell you you're not crazy." The applause, the tears, the silent nods, they were the medicine I hadn't known I needed. I left the manor that night with my head high, the Cotswolds stars bright above. The truth was no longer theirs to bury. It was mine to wield. Sitting on the velvet sofa in my bath townhouse, the night air drifting through the open window, I opened my laptop and began to write. Not as an anonymous survivor, but as Chloe Whitman, unapologetic and whole. My blog, titled A Fall, a Beginning, laid bare my story. The betrayal of my husband Sebastian, who pushed me down the stairs to test my pregnancy. The cruel laugh of my sister Elise, who orchestrated my humiliation. The erased footage, the fake ultrasound kit, the stolen journal pages. I didn't write for revenge. I wrote for liberation, each word a brick pulled from the walls they'd built around my truth. As I hit publish, the weight in my chest lifted, replaced by a quiet strength like the steady glow of Bath's street lamps against the night. The next morning, an unmarked envelope lay on my doorstep, its gray type spelling my name. Inside, a letter from the North Carolina Women's Advocacy Collective invited me to share my story at a global summit for survivors of psychological abuse. I sat with it, the paper soft in my hands, and felt no fear, only clarity. I smiled, set my pen down, and whispered to the empty room, "This is only the beginning." My story wasn't just mine anymore. It was a beacon for others, proof that silence isn't surrender. It's where truth gathers strength to erupt. 5 lessons carried me through this storm, and I share them with you. First, trust your instincts. When doubt creeps in, when others make you question your reality, listen to the voice within, it knows. Second, evidence is your armor. I kept receipts, recordings, and timestamps. They became my shield when their lies tried to bury me. Third, betrayal doesn't define you. Sebastian and Elise's actions revealed their hearts, not mine. I chose to rise, not to mirror their cruelty. Fourth, find your allies. Ivy's courage, Jasper's letter, the women at the retreat, they reminded me I wasn't alone. Finally, your voice is your power. Speaking my truth, first anonymously, then under my name, set me free. You don't need justice to heal, you need to be heard. My story is evidence that silence isn't defeat. It's the pause before the truth roars. If you've ever been gaslit, made to doubt your own pain, trust your gut. Speak because you deserve to be heard. I'm not here to tell you how to heal, but to say you're not crazy. Your reality is valid, and your voice matters. If this story resonated, type 1 in the comments and share where you're watching from. Tell me what hit home or what you'd have done differently. I'm listening. If it didn't connect, let me know why. Your perspective matters. Like and share this video to spread the truth, and subscribe to my channel for more stories of pain, healing, and strength. Together, we'll keep breaking the silence.